I am Laura Dixon, and you are listening to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast, episode number 82, What Makes Weight Loss Permanent? Welcome to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast. I'm going to teach you how to get out of your diet brain so that you too can be naturally thin for life. No counting, restricting, or obsessing. I am going to take the mystery out of it for you so that you can become naturally thin starting today. Are you ready? Let's do this. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. We just celebrated the 4th of July, which is our Independence Day here in the US. And for most of us here, it's often a long celebration weekend, which often entails a lot of drinking and food and parties and all of the things. Which used to mean for me getting on the scale after the celebration or maybe a week after because I had to quick exercise to get some of the weight off before I could even step on the scale and then step on the scale and see it go up like 10 pounds or just like decide I'm avoiding it altogether for the next 6 months. So I wanted to share with you what makes weight loss permanent, where you don't have these big up and downs and you don't go through the forget it, it doesn't matter phase followed by the time to get serious phase. Because how exhausting is all of that? And no one of us wants to live our life that way for the rest of our lives. Now, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you're always getting the latest episodes. And if you're loving the podcast, take a minute to leave a review and write a review. That helps the podcast find more women like you who want to learn how to be naturally thin. So many of you lose weight and tell me all about your weight loss by simply applying what you learn on this podcast. And I want that to be available to all women who want to lose weight without obsessing and driving themselves crazy, because it is 100% possible if you want it. So thank you for taking a minute to do that and to leave a review. So why is it that weight loss doesn't ever seem permanent? How many of us can look around in our lives and see person after person that we know lose weight and put it back on and lose weight and put it back on, let alone our own weight loss journey? There are a bunch of stats on this, and I've seen everything from less than 20% of people will lose weight and keep it off, and that's only within a year. But then when you go out to like 5 years, it's something like only 1% of people will lose weight and keep it off. Why is that? And how do you become a part of the 1% of people that lose weight and keep it off for life? How is it that I've been able to easily sit at my naturally thin weight of 140 pounds at 5'11", whether I was working 80 hours a week, whether I was on vacation or working from home or working in the office or exercising or not exercising, doing different types of exercise, eating different types of food, whether I'm pregnant or not pregnant? How is that possible? It is because it is not about finding how to keep the weight off. It isn't about the quote unquote perfect routine. So often you think your ability to lose weight and keep it off to make it permanent is about the certainty of a routine or a particular way of eating. I don't know if you've noticed, but life doesn't really seem to allow for that consistently every single day. And I'm so thankful that it doesn't. How boring. Do you want to force yourself to eat the same way every day forever? Like, no one wants to do that. Or to force yourself to be super strict and then to spend all of your mental energy looking forward to a quote unquote cheat day. No one wants to do that. But then we think that is the answer, right? How many of you think, well, if I just found the perfect routine, if I just found the perfect way to eat and I could do that forever and never deviate and life never got in the way of that, then I would be able to lose weight and keep it off. Weight loss is permanent when you understand that it is about becoming the version of you who just is naturally thin. It is a part of you. It's not something you step in and out of. Who you are, your identity, the permanent parts of your life, the way you see yourself, is a reflection of the collection of thoughts that you think about yourself. These are thoughts you choose. Whether or not you've really decided deliberately, the way you see yourself, your identity, including you being in your body, including you and your relationship with food, is a collection of thoughts that you choose to think about yourself. How you think about yourself is a decision. You can decide you will struggle with your weight forever because of X, Y, and Z reasons. Or you can tell yourself, no, I figure it out. I'm not someone that battles and struggles forever. I am just naturally thin. I become naturally thin. Being naturally thin is a part of your identity, not something you do or don't do. That is how losing weight and keeping it off becomes permanent. So how do you do this? How do you make being naturally thin just become a part of who you are? How do you make it become just a part of the way that you choose to think about yourself, the way you think about yourself, and how you identify you in this world? Before I tell you how to do this, how to have being naturally thin just become a part of who you are, become a part of your identity, you want to make sure that when you're doing this, you don't attach any morality to it. So often in our society, we find that thinner is better and you should be thinner. And if you're not thin, then it means something's wrong with you and you're lazy and all that crap we learn. No, that's not how you become naturally thin. It's not, I need to run away from these quote unquote bad things and move towards being naturally thin. Being naturally thin and deciding who you are and who you want to be, that collection of thoughts that creates your identity, is a decision you get to make, not because one is better or worse, but because you just want to. So before I dive in how I suggest you get started on this, I want you to make sure that as you go through this process of understanding how you think about yourself, it's not because one way is right or wrong. It's just because the way you want to think about yourself when you're naturally thin, if you want to lose weight, you want it to be simple, you want it to be easy, then understanding your mind and choosing thoughts that create that being just a part of you in a way that serves you, in a way that feels good, just because you want to. So first, when you're making being naturally thin become just a part of you, just become a way that you think about yourself, become just who you are, first you want to understand, how do you think about yourself? And second, understand how that current way of thinking leads to your current decisions. So essentially, you're identifying, what is my current identity around my weight and losing weight? And how does that impact the decisions I'm making today? A thinner body losing weight is a compound effect of your decisions over a time frame. If you don't understand your decision-making process, how are you ever going to change it? You won't, right? Hence the cyclical nature of dieting. We don't really understand when we're dieting why we're choosing particular foods, why we're choosing to overeat. We don't understand and look at how we think about ourselves. And so then we end up dieting and putting weight on, and dieting and putting weight on, and driving ourselves crazy, dieting and putting weight on. And all of that goes with the up and downs of being serious and telling ourselves it doesn't matter, and being serious and back on the bandwagon, and then telling ourselves, forget it, it's too hard. All of that comes from a lack of understanding of how you think about yourself, the thoughts in your mind that drive your current decisions. Only once you understand how you're currently identifying and thinking about yourself and how that leads to your current decisions, then you can understand that you have the power and the ability to change your decision-making process, and change your decision-making process with the way you think, not willpower. Using willpower is not actually changing your decision-making process. It's like trying to put a Band-Aid on a decision-making process that you don't want. It will never stay put. Using willpower actually means you keep the same decision-making process and then you try to override it with force. That will always result in a battle and a struggle. So here's how I recommend you do this. I recommend you take some notes for yourself. Like literally go throughout your day and just jot down and write down how you think about yourself. How do you think about hunger, food, your body? And just out of complete curiosity, write down those thoughts. Do you hate feeling hungry? Do you tell yourself, I don't know what I'm supposed to eat? Do you tell yourself, I don't like the way my stomach looks? Do you tell yourself, I have to lose weight? And then if I finally do lose the weight, I'll be able to feel like I'm truly successful in this area of my life. What do you make losing weight mean about you? Just go throughout your day with curiosity and write down how you think about yourself in relationship to food and your weight. Then write down how you make your decisions around food. How do you decide to eat? Do you decide to eat food that feels good in your body when you're at work, but not at 9 p.m.? Do you decide to eat more food than your body wants when you're around other people or typically by yourself? How do you make your decisions around food? Losing the weight you want for good and being naturally thin is only up to you. That's what I want you to take away from going through this awareness exercise of what's going through my mind. How do I think about myself with hunger and food and my body? And how does that impact and influence the decisions I make around food so that you really can see being naturally thin is only up to you, no one else. Being naturally thin isn't dependent upon whether or not your partner or your kids bring quote unquote good or quote unquote bad food into the house. Being naturally thin isn't about even seeing food as good or bad. Being naturally thin isn't dependent on whether you eat at home or in a restaurant. Being naturally thin isn't dependent upon whether you cook or not. So often I hear women say, if I could just find the right routine, if my weekends were like my weekdays, if my kids didn't make me feel so frustrated, none of that is true. That is a weight loss diet brain wanting to feel the confidence and the certainty of losing weight by relying on a routine that we think will just stay the same forever. When you're naturally thin, it's just a part of who you are. You don't say to yourself, well, I'm not a mom today because I spent less time with my kids on a Wednesday than a Sunday. No, you're a mom either way because it's just a part of your identity. It's the same with being naturally thin. Even on days you overeat, even on days the scale goes up, even on days the scale goes down. So once you understand how you think about yourself and how that current thinking leads to your current decision-making process around food, then from there, ask yourself, what is it like when I am naturally thin? How does that version of me think about herself and food? And how does that thought process lead to different decisions without more willpower? Then from there, you have two angles. Right? So you've noticed, what is the current way that I think about my hunger, my food, my weight, my body? How does that lead to my current decision-making process? You can imagine on a piece of paper, right? One side of the paper is like, here's what I do currently. Here's what I do when I'm naturally thin. Here's how I think when I'm naturally thin. Here's how I make my decisions around food when I'm naturally thin. And then from there, you have two angles. You can notice when your thoughts don't align with the identity of being naturally thin. When you go throughout your day now and you notice, oh, I maybe think I need to eat right now because I'm stressed out, but I'm not hungry. You can notice, actually, that's not how I think when I'm naturally thin. When I'm naturally thin, I know how to be with stress and I don't need the food to escape the stress. So you can notice the thought patterns of your current thoughts that don't align with your naturally thin thoughts when you're able to look at both. Current thoughts, naturally thin thoughts. And then you're also able to look at your decisions and look and see, when do my current decisions around food, when do those not align with my naturally thin self, my naturally thin decisions? Now, of course, your thoughts drive all of your action. You do not take any action of eating or not eating without a thought process first. So you want to understand both. What's the thought process? And change your thoughts to identify as being naturally thin. That is how it becomes permanent. But you can also use your actions, your decisions around food to trigger, to notice when you've stepped out of your naturally thin alignment, when you've stepped out of being your naturally thin self, and then just ask yourself, why? What was I thinking in that moment that led me to overeat? What was I thinking in that moment that had me believing food was going to be the answer to something other than hunger? The permanence of weight loss doesn't, quote unquote, happen to you. It is a choice. It is a decision. So the other thing you can do, in addition to just looking at how do I think now? How do I make my decisions around food now? And what do I do when I'm naturally thin? And how can I become more of that version of me who is naturally thin? How can I take on that identity now? The other thing you can do, in addition to that, is ask yourself this: what makes other areas of your life, quote unquote, permanent? Let's say you own a house. That house is permanently yours. You may identify as a homeowner and really think about yourself as a permanent homeowner until you decide to sell it. But you may even identify as a homeowner so strongly that you buy another house. And so the permanence of being a homeowner isn't even because of the current house you live in. You just identify as a homeowner. You have thoughts about yourself as a homeowner. And because you have thoughts about yourself as a homeowner, guess what? Your action will always align with that. Even when you sell the current house, you go and buy another house. And then maybe you sell that house and you go and buy another house. Or maybe you even sell your house and you don't own a house for a period of time while you're looking for a house, but you still identify so strongly as a homeowner, you inevitably buy a house. And you even think about yourself as a homeowner when you're not even in your house, like when you're at work, right? You may just think about yourself as a homeowner, so much so that you always own a home. But the way you got there is because of the way you decided to think about yourself as a homeowner, your identity as a homeowner. Or let's say you are a doctor, or fill in the blank for however you identify yourself in your career, if it's a part of how you think about yourself, how you identify what you call yourself in your career. But in this example, let's say you're a doctor. What makes you a doctor? Sure, the credential of being a doctor, but more importantly, consider this. It's the thoughts you have about yourself as the doctor, much more so than the credential that allows you to practice medicine. I'm actually in a mastermind for my business with other coaches, and there are several doctors. And I know some doctors who've stopped practicing medicine for other reasons, but in this mastermind, there's other coaches that no longer practice medicine. They own coaching businesses. They often still think of themselves as doctors. It's such a strong part of their identity, whether or not they are practicing medicine. I know doctors that are even retired. They still think of themselves as a doctor because it's such a part of their identity, which means they have a collection of thoughts about themselves that allows them to continue to think about themselves as a doctor, even if they're retired and can't practice medicine. Like, let's say they legally can't practice medicine, they still talk about themselves as a doctor, right? Because it's so much more about that collection of thoughts, that identity that they choose to think about themselves, that they'll die thinking of themselves as a doctor. The last example I want to use is being a parent. And I love this one because you can see it on both ends. I identified as being a mom before I had children. I wanted to be a mom. I imagined being a mom. I had quote unquote certainty around being a mom before I ever had any kids. How is that possible? Because of the way I decided to think about myself. And now, let's say something terrible happened and I lost all of my children. I would still choose to think of myself as a mom. I would identify as a mother. And for those of you with children, imagine you lost them. Would you wake up and the next day say, well, today I'm not a mom because my child is no longer alive? I know this is an extreme example, but I want you to consider it because it shows you how strongly we think about ourselves and how that creates our identity. If I lost my children, I would never stop thinking of myself as their mother. I would never stop thinking of myself as a mom. That would continue to be a part of my identity. And if the same happened to you, my guess is you would always think of yourself as a mom. Why? Because of the thoughts you have about yourself as a mom. You identify as a mother. That is why thinking of yourself as a mom is permanent, because even if something terrible happened and you lost your child, you will always think of yourself as a mom. So really ask yourself, Pick an area of your life that you have thoughts about yourself that make a particular part of you, a particular area that you just identify as a part of who you are, and ask yourself, what makes that permanent? What are the thoughts I think about myself in that particular area of my life that make it permanent? That area of your life that you would never question. You don't doubt it. It's just a part of who you are. And then why? Why do you make that decision to choose that to be a part of your identity? And notice, it's the thoughts you think about yourself in relation to that area of your life. That is also how being naturally thin becomes permanent. It isn't something you do or you don't do. It's just a part of you. How different is that when you compare being naturally thin being just a part of you versus what we do losing weight on a diet? Losing weight on a diet isn't about who you are. It's about trying to get rid of something, trying to get rid of the weight, trying to find the routine to lose the weight. So instead of trying to quote unquote get rid of something you don't want, instead of trying to get rid of the weight, think more about what you do want. Who you are when you are naturally thin. Why is it permanent for that version of you? And become that version of you where being naturally thin is a part of who you are. And like I said in the beginning, not because it's better or it's worse or there's any morality associated with it, none of that crap. Just because you want to. Now, before I end this episode, I want to share some thoughts that I have about myself when I think about my identity as being naturally thin. Just to give you an example, and I don't want you to use my thoughts if they don't resonate with you, if they don't serve you. I want you to find your own thoughts, but I want you to just think about, as I give you these thoughts, imagine having a brain that thought this way on default, how different your decision-making process around food would be because of these collection of thoughts. So here are some of my thoughts about myself and my hunger and my food and my body. First, I love being naturally thin. I love the way I feel in my body. No food is ever worth feeling terrible in my body to me. No food solves any problem for me. Food is only temporary. I get to make decisions around food for the rest of my life. Food is food and I enjoy it, but I don't need it to make me feel better. I know how to handle any emotion without needing food. I love feeling light and airy and energized in my body. I know my body wants to feel as optimal as possible, and I want to honor that. Even if I do eat something or a quantity of food that my body tells me isn't quite right, I always know how to come back to feeling light and airy and energized. My body is always with me, so I want to feel as good as possible. Being naturally thin is the best. I wouldn't trade it for the world. Being naturally thin is just a part of who I am. I never want to feel uncomfortable in my body. I never need to worry about my weight. I love using the scale as a tool to understand my body. I always know why I lose weight and why I put it on, and I know how to reach any weight I want. I know how to know when my body is pleased and feeling good. Being naturally thin is simple and easy for me. The way I am around food now is so much easier than I ever thought possible. I am so thankful to myself for how I think about food now. That collection of thoughts I have about myself, and I have many more, imagine you having similar thoughts. You don't need the same ones. You want to know what yours are, but imagine how much easier it is to eat for me when I'm hungry, to easily stop when I'm satisfied, and to eat food that serves me with those thoughts compared to your default thoughts that make it hard for you now. The permanence of being naturally thin comes from the thoughts you choose to think on purpose. I'm going to say that again. It's a decision. You choose your thoughts. Just because you have some crappy thoughts you gathered along your life, from dieting, from how you grew up, from wherever, it doesn't mean you have to choose to keep thinking them. Here's the crazy thing, which is why the vast majority of people, depending on the stat, it could be why 99% of people lose weight and put it back on. Because if you identify as someone who will always need to focus on losing weight, as someone who's always struggling, as someone who always has to diet, who this is just going to be hard for life, that there's something wrong with you, that you're never going to figure this out. If that's how you identify yourself, that will be the permanence you create. But struggling stops being permanent when you make a decision to stop telling yourself the story that you will always struggle. What is permanent in your life is the result of the way you think about yourself over and over again. So if you think you will always struggle, you will always struggle. If you think of yourself as being naturally thin, becoming naturally thin, learning to be naturally thin, and you have naturally thin thoughts and you identify that way, that will be who you become. That will be your reality instead of the struggle. Permanence is a decision to think of yourself as being naturally thin. So are you willing to be wrong and let go of the story you have been telling yourself all of these years about why it's so hard and how you will never get there and how you will always struggle, and tell yourself a new story? Because you get to decide. You get to choose the thoughts that you think on purpose. And when you do, notice the change that can start to happen in an instant. Change only comes ever from a decision. So decide now, what does your naturally thin version of you, what are her thoughts? What is her identity around being naturally thin? What allows it to be easy and simple for her? What allows being naturally thin to be just a part of you? If you want help with this, make sure to join the Naturally Thin for Life program. And we're doing a special live Naturally Thin Confidence course starting the end of July 2021. So make sure you join so that you will be able to come to that course live. It's an entire course on how to see yourself confidently as that naturally thin version of you so that it becomes permanent, so that you learn that confidence along the journey of losing weight, not waiting until the weight is gone. Because we all know the number on the scale doesn't magically make us all more confident. We've all lost weight before. It didn't happen that way. So when you join now, you get access to this live course in addition to the entire Naturally Thin for Life program as a part of your membership when you join. And if you join after July 2021, you will automatically get access to the Naturally Thin Confidence course on demand as a part of your program. Listen to the link in the outro for more information on how to join Naturally Thin for Life, and I will see you there. All right, my friends, have an amazing day, and I will talk with you all next week. Friend, if you are loving what you are learning here on the podcast, you have to come check out my Naturally Thin for Life program. It is my on-demand lifetime access program where I teach you brand new concepts not taught here on the podcast. And I will walk you through exactly how to implement all of the tools I teach you here so that they become just a part of you. You will learn exactly how to understand your specific brain and your specific body so that you become naturally thin for the rest of your life and you no longer struggle with your weight. Inside of the Naturally Thin for Life program, you can also receive live help so that you consistently make progress and reach your goal. I will teach you how to accelerate your naturally thin journey in a sustainable way so that the change becomes permanent. The best part is that it's risk-free. You either love it or I will give you your money back. If you are ready to finally be naturally thin for life, join us at lauradixoncoaching.com/work with me. That's LAURADIXON coaching.com and click on the Work With Me tab. I cannot wait to see you there.